What's up, everybody on YouTube? How's everybody doing? I'm doing just fine. Doing awesome, actually. So today, welcome back to another building tips and tricks video, where in this video, I'm going to show you guys how to texture your builds. All right, so let's jump right into it. What is texturing when we're talking about building with our builds? Well, let's say you have a plain wall like this wall here. It's pretty plain, just simple stone. We're going to add in some andesite. Dot it here and there, like this, kind of just randomly. The more random, the better. And then we're going to take another block that kind of is like the same texture, a little bit roughness, kind of mix it in here and there. And, you know, you can switch back and forth between your andesite. You can also take some stone and all that stuff and kind of just mix it in a little bit. That is what texturing is. It's taking something that is a little bit more boring and then kind of working on it, making it a little bit better. So let's do that again. You know, let's take a look at seeing what we can do to these walls and just making them a little bit better. Now, the difference with these walls is that these have some more structure to them. I have these structural pillars here that are still flat. This is just not really focusing on depth as much as texture. It's just showing how much texture can do without depth, because there's a lot of builds that don't use depth at all. They mainly rely on texturing, and texturing is super important. And so when we come into looking like a wall like this, now, you know, of course, you can have like a window punched out here, you know, and that can add for a little bit of difference into a flat wall. But the main thing is, you know, around that window or in that wall, we still want to have those different textures. Now, it only takes like a few blocks to really kind of make it look like a little bit different. And you can see with just those little few additions, it's really changed up that dynamic of that wall. Now, let's say if you did have a window here, you could put like a little bit of a stair upside down, and that really changes it as well. So that's just one thing to keep in mind. Now, if we go over here to this wall right here, we can do the same thing, you know, just coming in here, adding a little bit of andesite, and voila. So it just changes up that wall, and you can see we just have different, support pillars there, or structural, pillars, making that little bit of a border. Okay, so we talked about like the support pillars and how we can kind of enclose our wall, right? So this adds for texture as well. This pillar right here is adding for texture and kind of keeping this kind of in like a frame. So that's what it's doing right here. And just to see, these are the blocks that we're using. So these blocks are on the same sort of palette. They're on that gray palette. And we're going from dark to kind of a little bit lighter, a little bit even lighter, and then even more so light. So, this would be pretty light. And then you could say, something like smooth stone would be like really bright, right? So that's like a gradient kind of effect. And that's really what when you're thinking about texturing, you kind of want to think, okay, what blocks are sort of similar? What blocks are going to go together? And so, for instance, if we had a wall back here, we can use that. Now, for these support pillars, I've kind of added a little bit more to them to kind of show that they are. And one of the things I like to do is start off with just one block first, right? Start off with one block and then go back in, add in your second block, and then potentially a third block. Now, you'll see later on, as an example, I only use like really 2 blocks, and that adds for a lot. So as you can see here, and we'll do this one over here as well. And again, there's not too much depth going on here. We only have like this little guy sticking out, and that doesn't add for a lot of depth. It's mainly relying on the texturing side of things. And as you can see, something like that. Now, that's just 2 examples of how to do it. You could fill it all in with 1 block, then come back later, add in your second block, and maybe even a third block to kind of texture. But yeah, it's pretty nice how that kind of works out. All right, so now we're going with a lot of blocks here. We have a lot of blocks going on. And you might see this, in like a lot of houses, where we have like our support frame, they have the frame going around. But here, we're adding a little bit more structure to our wall. And this also adds for texture. So we can see we have a nice foundation right here, and then we kind of have our looser you know, maybe stones, different stone. Maybe this is like a stone house wall, and this is like kind of just being supported by the frame and our more structural brick down here. So that's another way you can sort of add structure into the texture. Instead of it being loose like this, we can add in a little bit of a support right here, and that kind of adds for a nice little wall. You can pop in a window or two. So that's just another way of adding that texture with using a frame and then having more of a support down here. And you can see, again, we have our structures, our structure blocks here. Like these are like the structure, the frame working blocks. And then we have our looser, kind of more loosey, gravelly stone type of blocks over there. So pretty cool. So what other blocks can we texture with? Well, there is an extreme amount of blocks you can texture with in this game. It doesn't just end with the andesite, stone, all the the typical blocks that people are used to texturing with. It continues on with wood, ever since we got the stripped logs, we have all this different variations that we can do with planks now, and we can add some really cool texturing, so we can have this little bit of a smoother kind of plank with a little bit of a rougher, more tile type of plank, and it looks really, really cool. And I love this. Now, this is just an example of like what a wood cabin, side would kind of look like with all that texturing going on. All right, so now we're going to get into some like more advanced kind of texturing, because you want to kind of like experiment with different blocks when it comes to texturing, let's just say, okay, let's just build this up real quick. Real fast. We'll build like this 2x2 one up here. Let's say if this was all brick, right? If that's all brick, that looks pretty boring. But if we go ahead and add in some granite and blocks that are similar, like gray terracotta, sort of has that same tone as like the joints in the brick, kind of adds for a nice little effect there. And of course, you can break it up. You can play around with it. Texturing can take a little bit of time. You can see now we don't have any more that much brick. I kind of like that. I like the way that looks. So I'm going to keep that now. And you can see we kind of have just the right amount of everything. And I really, really like that. So that's all about what texturing is. It's kind of finding out which blocks sort of match. And you can see that like joint color right there is basically the same color as this. And then it has that reddish tone to it. So you want to see, you can put blocks next to each other. You can just see, which ones kind of work. Go into creative and kind of just experiment with like the texturing side of things, because there's a lot of different blocks that look, or you might not even think, like you might think, oh, this is too smooth to go with brick. But just the fact that it can, kind of be textured that way, kind of looks a little bit nice. It kind of blends in a little bit, and it just, has a nice face to a house or whatever. So the way I look at it as, and for those of you that might not be understanding, like, okay, how can this harsh of a texture go with this smooth of a texture? And how can this like almost dirt-like texture go with all these? Well, the reason why is mainly because I like to think of it as, this is the paint wearing off, and this is like the brick underneath. Right? So if you're going for like a more rustic build, that's where this really shines, because this looks like a worn look. It looks like it's being worn off, which is a very good like little technique. And now it starts to make sense, right? It starts to make sense. It's like, oh, right, this is the original. So just imagine this was the original wall, right? This right here is the original wall. And then over time, it started, getting a little bit more worn, even that just looks nice. I like that. And then you kind of have the brick showing through, like the actual like foundation is starting to show through the wall itself. You can kind of see it. So if that makes a little bit more sense to you and how texturing sort of works, I'm glad it does. So there you go. All right, so the last little bit here, I'm just going to do all in one go, because this sort of has something to relate to the last little bit we did over here with the granite. So this is just using the white blocks instead and going for like that more medieval Victorian style of look. So yeah, this one is sort of like a gradient going up. So this is the more rougher texture, because maybe I was thinking of maybe more towards the bottom, things wear out more. And then as you go up, it's sort of that finish. This used to look like all of this, but as time, and water damage and whatever from the ground, this is starting to wear out, and you can see that gradient see that effect in the build, and when you're standing back looking at it, it really does show, and it really does look nice. Over here, we have sort of a different style of texture, and you can kind of see like how the white concrete blends really nicely with the almost like chipped off paint look of the diorite. That's kind of how I look at it is. So again, all of this used to be like this smooth white paint, but now it's this really kind of just roughed up look to it. So, and then over here we have sort of a smoother. This is probably my favorite because it has these little dots of white, and then you can see it's sort of wearing off. It's very subtle texturing, and I really like this. Whereas this is kind of harsh looking, I like this version a little bit better because this doesn't, it's not right in your face. It's not the diorite. The diorite's a little bit darker looking, and this is a little bit more subtle. It's a little bit more of a smoother texture, and you only notice it if you're up close. Whereas, if you're far away, it kind of blends, and the white concrete powder and the white wool really go well together, and I really like that. Behind here, you can see this is where I kind of like the diorite, because if you have a sort of a stone foundation or a stonework at the bottom, and then you build up with this diorite and white concrete, it really shines. So the darker spots in the diorite really blend well with the darker spots on the cobblestone. It kind of, they're going together. So it really does kind of complement each other, and it really does look good. And I like that about this. So that's really, really cool. Now, speaking of complementing the build, so let's say we have a stone wall like this, but we also want to have some brick walls as this. Instead of putting andesite in, let's put a little bit of gravel, because gravel, you can see, has a little bit of red in there, and it might be a little bit hard to kind of notice at first, but it really does match pretty well with that little bit of brick and that red color on the side here. So let's say if you were having a combination of the two, that would really work a lot better than andesite. Let's just see. So if I put andesite in here, you can see andesite's a little bit more of a colder texture, whereas gravel, for instance, so we'll grab some gravel, and you can see that instantly just looks redder, and it looks nicer, and it kind of makes the other stones kind of blend a little bit better, because it's still gray, but it has a little bit of a redder hue, whereas the andesite, again, has a little bit of a colder and more bluer vibe going for it. So just kind of a little subtle thing, but it really complements the build and really looks nice. But yeah, guys, that's going to do it for this texturing video. Hopefully that gave you a little bit of insight on how to texture in Minecraft. It's not necessary. Texturing is just like a little bit of a subjective thing. If you just like using your depth, that's fine too. If you like using both, that's fine. But texturing is a really nice thing that you can add to your builds, because it gives so much more appeal, and yet gives a little bit more history to the builds, because as I was saying, you can make things feel a little bit more rustic. You can make things feel a little bit more just in tune with the build that you're trying to make. And I think that's really something that is really nice about texturing. So definitely give it a go. Try it out, see what you think, and hopefully this video did help you. If it did, leave a like on it, and I consider, I hope you guys to subscribe, because that would be awesome, and there will be more building tips and tricks videos in the future. But yes, guys, that's going to do it. As always, guys, don't forget to be awesome, and I'll see you next time.